I stood frozen in the grand ballroom of the Harborview Country Club, surrounded by 200 guests dressed in cocktail attire, champagne glasses glittering under crystal chandeliers. My father, Gerald, gripped the microphone with his usual commanding presence and announced that my younger brother Derek would inherit our family's construction company worth $12 million. Then he turned to me with cold eyes and said I'd get nothing. Maybe a job application to Wendy's if I was lucky enough not to mess that up. Derek sneered from his seat and added that I'd screw that up too. The room fell completely silent, uncomfortable glances bouncing between guests like pinballs. Then Howard Sterling, our family lawyer, cleared his throat and stood up. The humiliation hit me like a physical blow. I could feel my face burning, my hands trembling at my sides. 200 pairs of eyes were on me, some pitying, some curious, some gleefully watching the train wreck unfold. My father's words echoed in my head, each syllable a knife twisting deeper. A job at Wendy's, as if 15 years of my life meant nothing. I'd started working at Sullivan Construction when I was 16 years old. While other teenagers spent summers at the beach or working easy retail jobs, I was in our dusty office filing permits and learning to read blueprints. My father said if I wanted to be part of the family business, I had to start at the bottom like everyone else. So I did. I made coffee, I answered phones, I organized the supply closet. I did every grunt task without complaint because I thought I was building towards something. I put myself through Penn State, earning a degree in construction management while working part-time at the company. I graduated with honors, writing my senior thesis on sustainable building practices in residential development. I was so proud the day I walked across that stage. My father didn't attend the ceremony. He said he had an important client meeting. Derek was there, though, 17 years old and hungover, making jokes through the whole thing. After graduation, I came back full-time. I worked my way up through sheer determination and competence. Assistant project manager at 23, full project manager at 26. By 30, I was overseeing 8 major developments simultaneously, juggling million-dollar budgets, managing subcontractors, solving problems that would have sunk lesser professionals. I turned failing projects into profitable ones. I salvaged client relationships that Derek's incompetence had nearly destroyed. I worked 60-hour weeks, sacrificed weekends, missed weddings and birthdays and holidays. Derek, meanwhile, had joined the company 4 years ago at age 24, after dropping out of Arizona State twice and burning through 3 different majors. He'd spent a year backpacking through Europe on Dad's dime, then decided he was ready to take his place in the family business. Dad gave him a corner office and the title of Vice President of Client Relations. Derek spent most of his workdays on the golf course, schmoozing clients with Dad's credit card and taking selfies for his social media. When he actually showed up to the office, he'd stride through taking credit for projects I'd spent months developing. My mother died when I was 12. Breast cancer, aggressive, and merciless. She was the heart of our family, the one who made us feel like we mattered as people, not just as names on a company letterhead. After she passed, Dad changed. He became harder, colder, more obsessed with the business and with legacy. Derek was 8 when we lost Mom, young enough that Dad could mold him into the golden boy, the heir apparent, the son who would carry on the family name in a way that apparently I never could. I'd spent 18 years trying to earn my father's love. 18 years proving I was worthy. 18 years hoping that one day he'd look at me with pride instead of dismissal. I'd turned down job offers from competitors in Boston and Seattle. I'd ended a relationship with a wonderful man because he wanted to move to Denver for his career and I couldn't leave the company. I'd given everything to this business, to this family, and my father had just announced to 200 people that I was worth less than a fast food application. Howard Sterling stood near the front table, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired and perpetually uncomfortable looking in his suit. I'd seen him around the office a few times over the years, handling minor legal paperwork, but I'd always assumed he was Dad's attorney. "Gerald," Howard said, his voice steady but tight. "I need to speak with you privately before this evening continues." Dad waved him off like he was swatting a fly. "Whatever it is can wait until Monday, Howard. This is a celebration." Derek raised his champagne glass toward me in a mocking toast. "To my sister, future employee of the month." Several people laughed nervously. Others looked away, embarrassed to be witnessing this. My best friend from college, Julia Martinez, sat at a table near the back. Her face was flushed with anger on my behalf. She'd flown in from Chicago for this event, taking time off from her job at a marketing firm. I'd told her it would be a nice party, a chance to celebrate Dad's 40 years in business. I hadn't expected this public execution. Frank Cordova, Dad's business partner and the company's CFO, sat at the head table looking deeply uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That should have been my first clue that something was very wrong. Howard Sterling didn't sit down. Instead, he walked deliberately to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. He opened his leather briefcase and removed a thick document folder. "I'm sorry, Gerald," Howard said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "But I have legal documents that everyone in this room needs to hear before any celebrations continue." Dad's face turned scarlet. "What the hell are you talking about? Sit down." Derek leaned forward in his chair. "Yeah, what is this? Some kind of joke?" Howard looked at me for a moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I couldn't quite identify. Sympathy? Resolve? 3 months ago, Howard said clearly, Gerald's older brother, Vincent Sullivan, passed away in Portland, Oregon. He left a will that directly impacts this family and this business. The room erupted in confused murmurs. I felt my stomach drop. Uncle Vincent? I barely knew I had an Uncle Vincent. Dad had always said his brother was estranged, that Vincent had moved away decades ago and they'd lost touch. The few times I'd asked about him as a child, Dad shut down the conversation, saying Vincent was a failure who'd squandered his opportunities and wasn't worth discussing. Dad stood up from his seat, knocking his chair backward. "That's enough, Howard." "No," Howard said quietly. "It's not." Howard Sterling stood firm at the front of the ballroom, the document folder open in his hands. The crystal chandeliers cast sharp shadows across his determined face. I couldn't breathe. An uncle I barely knew existed had died, and somehow this related to tonight's disaster? "Vincent Sullivan was not estranged by choice," Howard began, his voice cutting through the thick silence. "He was deliberately cut out of this family by Gerald 35 years ago." Dad's hands clenched into fists. "You have no right to air private family matters." "I have every right, Gerald. I'm Vincent's attorney, and I'm executing his final wishes." Howard turned to address the crowd. 35 years ago, the construction company that Gerald built his fortune on was actually started by their father, Thomas Sullivan. Thomas intended to leave the business equally to both his sons. I grabbed the edge of the nearest table for support. My grandfather Thomas had died when I was 2 years old. I had no memories of him, just a few old photographs Mom had kept. But Gerald was ambitious, Howard continued. He convinced his aging father that Vincent was irresponsible with money, that he had a drinking problem, that he couldn't be trusted with something as important as the family business. None of it was true. Gerald fabricated stories, forged documents, even had friends lie to Thomas about Vincent's supposed failures. "This is slander," Dad hissed. "I'll sue you into oblivion." "Sue a dead man's attorney for executing a will? Good luck." Howard's voice was cold. Thomas changed his will 6 months before he died. He left the entire construction company to Gerald alone. Vincent received $50,000 and nothing else. The business that should have been half his went entirely to his younger brother, based on lies. I looked at my father. His face had gone from red to a sickly gray color. "Vincent moved to Oregon heartbroken," Howard said. "He was 28 years old, cut off from his family, branded a failure by his own father. He took that $50,000 and started over. He worked logging jobs, saved every penny, and eventually started his own small timber business. The guests were completely silent now, riveted by this family drama unfolding like a soap opera. Over 30 years, Vincent built that timber business into something significant, Howard continued. He never married, never had children. He poured everything into his work and into becoming the kind of man his father thought he wasn't. And he never forgot what Gerald did to him. Derek found his voice. So what? Some bitter old man died nursing a grudge. What does this have to do with tonight? Howard looked at Derek with something close to contempt. Last year, Vincent was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. He hired private investigators to look into Gerald's life and business. Howard pulled out a stack of papers. What those investigators discovered was illuminating. My heart pounded. I felt Julia's presence beside me suddenly. She'd moved from her table to stand next to me, her hand finding mine. They found that Gerald's daughter, Melanie, had been the backbone of Sullivan Construction for 15 years, Howard said, looking directly at me. That she'd managed the company's most successful projects, that she'd brought in millions in revenue, that she'd earned a degree in construction management while working her way up from the bottom. Tears burned my eyes. They also found that Gerald's son, Derek, was spectacularly incompetent, Howard said flatly. That he'd been given credit for Melanie's work, that he coasted on his father's name while contributing virtually nothing of value. How dare you, Diane? Derek's mother and Dad's second wife stood up. She'd married my father 15 years ago, 3 years after Mom died. I'd never liked her, and the feeling was mutual. I'm not finished, Howard said. The investigators also uncovered evidence that Gerald had been systematically excluding Melanie from profit sharing, denying her promotions she'd earned, and publicly dismissing her contributions. They documented years of discrimination, favoritism, and what amounts to constructive fraud. Frank Cordova was sweating now, I noticed, small beads forming on his forehead. Vincent watched all of this from Portland, Howard said, his voice softening slightly. He saw his niece, a woman he'd never met, being treated the way he'd been treated. History repeating itself, a capable Sullivan being crushed by Gerald's ego and greed. I couldn't stop the tears now. They ran down my face silently. So Vincent restructured his entire estate with one goal, Howard said. To right the wrong that was done to him by doing right by Melanie. He opened the will document and began to read in a clear, formal voice. I, Vincent Edward Sullivan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate to my niece, Melanie Rose Sullivan. This includes my timber business, Sullivan Timber Industries of Portland, Oregon, currently valued at $18 million, all associated properties, accounts, and assets. The room exploded in gasps and exclamations. I couldn't process what I was hearing. $18 million? A business in Oregon? There's more, Howard said, raising his voice over the noise. 3 years ago, Vincent began quietly purchasing shares of Sullivan Construction through shell corporations. He bought out silent investors, minority shareholders, anyone willing to sell. Gerald never knew because the transactions were hidden behind multiple corporate layers. Dad sank into his chair, his face ashen. Vincent acquired 42% of the shares of Sullivan Construction, Howard said, making him the single largest shareholder. Those shares now belong to Melanie. Combined with the existing 15% she inherited from her mother's estate, Melanie Sullivan now owns 57% of Sullivan Construction. She is the majority shareholder and controlling owner of this company. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Derek launched himself out of his chair so fast it toppled over backward, crashing against the floor. That's impossible. This is fraud. I'll sue. I'll have every lawyer in the state on this. His face was purple with rage, spittle flying as he screamed. Several guests near him actually backed away. Dad sat frozen in his chair, staring at nothing, his mouth slightly open in shock. This is a conspiracy, Diane shrieked, her carefully applied makeup already starting to run as tears of fury streaked down her face. That vindictive old man was trying to destroy this family from beyond the grave. Melanie probably manipulated him, fed him lease. Julia's hand tightened around mine. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I couldn't answer. My legs felt weak. My entire body was shaking. Nothing made sense. I'd walked into this ballroom an hour ago expecting nothing more than a boring retirement speech and mediocre catering. Now, I was apparently a millionaire and the owner of my father's company. Guests were talking over each other, phones coming out to record the spectacle. This would be all over social media within the hour. The Sullivan family implosion, live and in high definition. Frank Cordova looked like he might pass out. His face had gone gray, and he was gripping the edge of the table so hard I could see his knuckles turning white even from across the room. "Order!" Howard's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone calm down." "Calm down?" Derek stalked toward Howard, and for a moment I thought he might actually take a swing at the lawyer. "You just told us some dead guy stole my inheritance." "Your inheritance?" Howard's eyebrows rose. "Gerald announced tonight he was giving you a company that was never entirely his to give. He owns 43%, which he earned through his work over the decades. But the majority now belongs to Melanie, as it should. She manipulated a dying man," Diane wailed again. "She must have visited him, poisoned his mind against Gerald." "Melanie never met Vincent," Howard said coldly. "She didn't even know he existed as anything more than a name. Vincent made these decisions based purely on investigative reports and his own judgment. He was of completely sound mind, as verified by 3 independent physicians. The will was witnessed by a judge, a notary, and Vincent's oncologist. It's airtight." I found my voice, though it came out shaky. "What financial irregularities?" Howard's expression shifted to something almost gentle when he looked at me. "Vincent's investigators found evidence that money has been disappearing from company accounts. Inflated project budgets, overcharged materials, funds being siphoned into private accounts. They documented what appears to be systematic embezzlement." Frank Cordova stood up abruptly. "I need some air." "Sit down, Frank," Howard said sharply. "You're not going anywhere." The CFO froze, then slowly sank back into his seat. "Derek has been living far beyond what his salary could possibly support," Howard continued. "The Tesla Model S, the downtown condo that rents for $4,000 a month, the boat he keeps docked at the marina. According to his official salary, he should be barely scraping by. Yet he's living like he makes $500,000 a year." "My father helps me," Derek said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Your father's personal accounts don't show any large gifts or transfers to you," Howard replied. "But certain shell companies that have been billing Sullivan Construction for non-existent services do show regular payments flowing to accounts that Derek controls." I felt sick. "How much?" "Preliminary estimates suggest around $2.7 million over the past 4 years. The number hung in the air like poison gas. $2.7 million. Stolen. From a company I'd poured my life into. Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "You can't prove any of this." Actually, Vincent's investigators were quite thorough. They have bank records, email trails, falsified invoices. They've already turned everything over to federal authorities. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division has been building a case for the past 2 months. Derek's face went from purple to white in an instant. "The FBI? Did you really think you could create fake subcontractor companies, approve invoices for work that was never performed, and nobody would eventually notice?" Howard shook his head. "You weren't even smart about it, Derek. You used your girlfriend's maiden name for one of the companies. You approved invoices from your own email account. Frank helped him hide it in the books," Dad said suddenly, his voice dead. He wasn't defending Derek. He was just stating a fact, his business brain still working, even in crisis. Frank's head snapped up. "Gerald, don't." "Frank's been skimming his own cut," Dad continued, staring at nothing. 30% of whatever Derek stole. I should have seen it sooner. The numbers never quite added up, but I trusted you. "You knew," I whispered, looking at my father. "You knew they were stealing and you did nothing?" I suspected, Dad said quietly. I didn't want to believe it. The admission was somehow worse than the theft. He'd known his son and his business partner were embezzling millions, and he'd look the other way, because confronting it would mean admitting Derek wasn't the golden boy he'd spent years building him up to be. I walked slowly to the microphone, my legs unsteady. Julia stayed close beside me. When I reached the front, I took the microphone from the stand. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out stronger than I expected. Thank you, Howard, for everything Vincent did, and for executing his wishes. I looked out at the crowd of guests, all watching me like I was a fascinating car accident. I accept my uncle's gift with gratitude, and with the determination to honor his faith in me. Then I turned to face my father directly. As majority shareholder of Sullivan Construction, my first official act is to place the company under immediate financial review. Every account, every transaction, every invoice from the past 5 years will be audited by an independent forensic accounting firm. Derek started moving toward the exit. My second act, I continued, raising my voice, is to suspend Derek Sullivan from all duties pending the outcome of the investigation. Effective immediately, he has no authority, no access to company accounts, facilities, or records. You can't do this, Derek shouted from halfway to the door. I'm the majority shareholder. I absolutely can do this. I looked at Frank. Frank Cordova is also suspended pending investigation. Frank put his head in his hands. My third act, I said, my voice steady now, is to inform my father that his retirement will not be happening on his terms. You don't get to ride off into the sunset with a golden parachute after enabling the theft of millions of dollars from a company that was never entirely yours to control. Dad finally looked at me. Really looked at me, for the first time in years. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Anger? Respect? Fear? I couldn't tell. He stood up, and for a moment I thought he might lunge at me. 2 security guards I hadn't noticed before stepped forward. They'd apparently come with Howard, anticipating exactly this kind of trouble. You ungrateful, Dad started, but his voice broke. Everything I built, everything I worked for, everything you stole from your brother, I said. Everything you stole from me. You built it on lies, Dad. And now it's over. Derek bolted for the exit. One of the security guards moved to intercept him, but Howard called out, "Let him go. Running now just makes him look guilty to the authorities who are already waiting to talk to him." Derek froze in the doorway, then turned back, his face a mask of panic and rage. "This isn't over," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. Just the hollow sound of someone watching their whole life collapse. "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." 3 days later, I sat in the Sullivan Construction conference room, surrounded by spreadsheets, bank statements, and grim-faced forensic accountants. The late morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. Outside, construction crews worked on the Monroe Street development, one of my projects completely unaware that the company they worked for had just undergone a seismic shift. I hadn't slept more than a few hours since the retirement party. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face as he announced I was worth nothing. Then I saw Howard standing up with those documents. Then Derek's panicked expression. Then the numbers, always the numbers, scrolling through my mind like a nightmare spreadsheet. Julia had taken emergency leave from her job in Chicago and was staying at my apartment. She'd been the one making sure I ate, forcing me to take breaks, reminding me that I was still human and not just a collection of financial obligations and betrayals. Last night she'd ordered Thai food and made me watch 2 episodes of a mindless sitcom before I was allowed to look at any more documents. The head forensic accountant, Patricia Chen, was a tiny woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the sharpest eyes I'd ever seen. She'd come highly recommended by Howard, with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in uncovering financial fraud. She didn't do small talk or sugarcoating. I appreciated that. "The preliminary findings are worse than we initially thought," Patricia said, spreading out a series of highlighted documents across the conference table. We've identified 2.7 million in direct embezzlement, but there are additional concerns. My stomach, which had been in a perpetual state of unease for days, clenched tighter. What kind of concerns? Your brother created 7 fake subcontractor companies over the past 4 years, Patricia explained, pointing to a chart her team had created. He would submit invoices for work that was never performed, or wildly inflate costs for work that was done. Frank Cordova approved these invoices and buried them in the general project expense accounts. She pulled up another document. Here's an example. The Riverside Plaza project, completed 2 years ago. Derek submitted an invoice from a company called Barton Concrete Services for foundation work, totaling $360,000. The actual foundation work was done by Martinez Brothers Concrete for $190,000. The difference, $170,000, went into an account controlled by Derek. And nobody noticed? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd been focused on managing projects, dealing with clients, solving on-site problems. I'd trusted that the financial oversight was being handled properly by Frank and my father. Frank was deliberately obfuscating the records, Patricia said. He'd split invoices across multiple projects, adjust budget categories, create enough complexity that a casual review wouldn't catch the discrepancies. He knew what he was doing. This wasn't amateur hour. Her associate, Marcus, a younger man with serious eyes behind thick-framed glasses, spoke up. We've also discovered that your salary has been systematically suppressed. According to industry standards and comparable positions at similar companies, you should have been earning between $180,000 and $220,000 annually for the past 5 years, based on your experience, education, and responsibilities. I was making $95,000, I said quietly. Exactly. You were underpaid by roughly 40% below market rate. Meanwhile, Derek was earning $215,000 a year, plus bonuses, despite having minimal responsibilities and no relevant education or experience. The injustice of it hit me like a wave. It wasn't just that they'd stolen money from the company. They'd stolen from me personally, paying me half of what I deserved while overpaying Derek for doing essentially nothing. There's more, Patricia said, and her tone made me brace myself. We found evidence that Frank was taking a cut of the embezzled funds. Approximately 30% of everything Derek stole was being transferred to offshore accounts that Frank controls. That's another $800,000. $981,000, Marcus corrected, checking his notes. To be precise. I put my head in my hands. What about my father? Did he know? Patricia and Marcus exchanged a glance. That's complicated, Patricia said carefully. We haven't found direct evidence that Gerald was receiving stolen funds. However, the level of financial oversight required for a company this size means he either knew and chose to ignore it, or was criminally negligent in his duties as CEO. Either way, he bears responsibility. His personal accounts show no suspicious activity? I asked. None that we've found. He lives well, but within the means his legitimate salary and dividends would provide. If he was aware of the embezzlement, he wasn't profiting from it directly. That somehow made it worse. He hadn't even stolen the money for himself. He just let it happen because confronting it would mean admitting his golden boy was a criminal. Marcus cleared his throat. There's something else. We found an encrypted file on Derek's computer. He apparently thought deleting it from his recycle bin was enough, but our IT specialist recovered it. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed a series of emails between Derek and someone named Richard Hanover. Richard Hanover is the CEO of Blackstone Construction, Patricia explained. One of your biggest competitors. I leaned forward, reading the emails with growing horror. They dated back 18 months. Derek had been selling company secrets, client lists with detailed notes on preferences and budgets, proprietary bidding strategies, information about upcoming projects before they were publicly announced. Even complaints or concerns that clients had shared with Sullivan Construction giving Blackstone the opportunity to swoop in and position themselves as the better alternative. He was getting paid for this? I asked, my voice hollow. $50,000 per quarter, Marcus said, plus a promised position as executive vice president at Blackstone once he'd prepared the ground, as they phrased it. I kept reading. The emails made it clear that Derek's plan was to cripple Sullivan Construction from the inside, then jump ship to Blackstone, taking several major clients with him. He was planning to do this right after Dad's retirement, once he assumed he'd be in control of the company. He was going to destroy his own father's company, I whispered. For money and a better title, Patricia confirmed. The betrayal goes beyond just embezzlement. This is corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, breach of fiduciary duty. The legal consequences are severe. I sat back in my chair feeling numb. My brother wasn't just a thief. He was a traitor who'd been systematically sabotaging the business that 3 generations of my family had built. And he would have succeeded if Uncle Vincent hadn't intervened. What are my options? I asked. Patricia folded her hands on the table. Legally, you have several paths. Criminal charges for the embezzlement and corporate espionage. Civil suits to recover the stolen funds plus damages. You could pursue maximum penalties, which would likely result in significant prison time for both Derek and Frank. But I sensed there was more. But if this becomes a public scandal, the company's reputation will take a massive hit. Clients will worry about stability and trustworthiness. Competitors will use it to poach your business. Banks might become nervous about extending credit. The 73 people who work for Sullivan Construction, most of whom are innocent and hardworking, could lose their jobs. I thought about those 73 employees. People like Rosa Martinez, who'd been running the supply logistics for 12 years and had 3 kids in high school. Like Tom Henderson, the site supervisor who was 6 years from retirement. Like Emma Wu, the young architect who'd just gotten engaged and was saving for a house. They didn't deserve to suffer because my brother was a criminal and my father was a coward. There's also the matter of your uncle's timber business in Oregon, Marcus added. Sullivan Timber Industries is profitable and well run, but integrating it with Sullivan Construction, while also dealing with a major scandal and criminal investigation, would be incredibly challenging. What would you recommend? I asked Patricia. She looked at me for a long moment, her sharp eyes assessing. That depends on what you want. Justice? Revenge? Protection of the business? All of the above? I want the people who did this to face consequences, I said slowly. But I don't want innocent people to suffer, and I want to build something better than what my father created. Something honest. Patricia nodded. Then we need to be strategic. Leverage the evidence to force cooperation and restitution, handle the legal consequences through controlled channels, and manage the public narrative carefully. Over the next hour, we hammered out a strategy. It wouldn't give me the satisfaction of seeing my brother and Frank publicly humiliated, but it would protect the company and the people who depended on it. Sometimes being an adult meant choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. My phone buzzed. A text from Julia. Eat something. I left a sandwich in the break room fridge. Don't make me come down there. Despite everything, I smiled. At least I had one person in my life who I could count on. Patricia began packing up her documents. We'll have a complete report ready in 48 hours. In the meantime, I'd recommend you prepare yourself for a difficult family conversation. More difficult than the retirement party? Much more, she said, because this time they'll know exactly how much trouble they're in. 5 days after the retirement party, I arranged a private meeting at Sullivan Construction headquarters. The building was closed for the weekend, empty except for security and the people I'd specifically invited. The conference room felt different without the usual bustle of employees, the silence heavy and oppressive. I'd positioned myself at the head of the long mahogany table, Howard Sterling on my right, and Patricia Chen on my left. 2 security guards stood near the doors, not overtly threatening, but definitely present. Julia had wanted to be there for moral support, but I'd asked her to wait in my office. This was family business, ugly as it was. Gerald arrived first, looking diminished somehow. He'd aged 10 years and 5 days. His usually impeccable suit was wrinkled, and his hair, normally styled perfectly, looked uncombed. He sat down without a word, not meeting my eyes. Frank Cordova came next, accompanied by his own lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Stevens who kept adjusting his tie. Frank's face was gray, and his hands shook as he opened his briefcase. Diane swept in wearing too much perfume and an expression of righteous indignation. "I don't know why I'm here. I had nothing to do with any business dealings." "You'll understand shortly," Howard said mildly. Derek was last, and he looked terrible. His usually styled hair was a mess, dark circles under his eyes, his expensive shirt wrinkled. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Thornton, kept a protective hand on his arm as they Saturday. I waited until everyone was settled, then nodded to Patricia. She opened her laptop and began displaying documents on the large screen at the end of the conference room. "Over the past week, my team has conducted a comprehensive forensic audit of Sullivan Construction's finances," Patricia began, her voice clinical and precise. "What we found constitutes criminal fraud, embezzlement, theft of trade secrets, and breach of fiduciary duty." She clicked through slides showing bank records, falsified invoices, email trails. Each document was damning, a paper trail of betrayal and greed. Derek's lawyer leaned forward. "My client disputes these allegations, and your client is on video bragging to his girlfriend about stealing from his father's company," Patricia interrupted, clicking to a new slide. "We recovered deleted videos from his phone. In one, filmed 8 months ago, he explicitly describes how he and Frank created fake companies to embezzle money." Derek's face went white. "That was private. That was evidence of criminal conspiracy," Patricia replied, "and it's already been turned over to federal prosecutors." She continued through the presentation, methodically destroying any possible defense. The fake subcontractor companies, the inflated invoices, the offshore accounts, the payments from Blackstone Construction for corporate espionage. When she got to the Blackstone emails, Gerald's head snapped up. He stared at Derek with an expression I'd never seen on my father's face before. Pure, undiluted rage, mixed with something that looked like heartbreak. "You were going to destroy the company?" Gerald's voice was barely a whisper. "My company? Everything I built?" "Dad, I can explain," Derek started. "Explain?" Gerald's voice rose. "You were selling our clients to Blackstone. You were planning to gut Sullivan Construction and leave it to die. You never appreciated me," Derek shouted back, suddenly defensive. "Everything was always about the business, about legacy, about the Sullivan name. I was just supposed to be your puppet, your mini-me, carrying on your precious empire. So you decided to burn it down instead?" "I decided to get what I deserved. I was tired of living in your shadow, tired of being compared to you, tired of being the son who could never measure up." The raw emotion in Derek's voice shocked me. For all his faults, for all his crimes, in that moment I glimpsed something human underneath the entitled exterior. A son desperate for his father's approval, twisting himself into knots trying to be someone he wasn't, and ultimately lashing out in the most destructive way possible. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. "You didn't have to measure up," Gerald said, and his voice broke. "You just had to be honest, to work hard, to care about something besides money and status. Like you did?" Derek laughed bitterly. "You lied to your own father to steal your brother's inheritance. You built this company on betrayal. I learned from the best." The words hung in the air like poison. Gerald looked like Derek had physically struck him. Diane spoke up, her voice shrill. "This is all Melanie's fault. She always resented Derek, always tried to make him look bad. She probably planted this evidence." I'd been silent through the whole exchange, but that broke my control. "I spent 15 years trying to earn my father's respect," I said, my voice cold and clear. 15 years, working myself to exhaustion, sacrificing everything, hoping one day he'd see me as something other than a disappointment. I never once tried to sabotage Derek. I didn't have to. He did that all by himself. I stood up, placing my hands flat on the table. Let me be absolutely clear about where we stand. The evidence against Derek and Frank is overwhelming and irrefutable. Federal prosecutors already have everything. Criminal charges are coming whether I cooperate or not. Frank made a small, wounded sound. However, I continued, I'm willing to offer terms that will minimize the damage to everyone involved, including the 73 innocent people who work for this company. Derek's lawyer sat up straighter. What kind of terms? I looked at Howard, who took over. Derek and Frank will cooperate fully with federal investigators, Howard said. They'll plead guilty to reduced charges, accept whatever criminal penalties the prosecutors determine appropriate, and agree to repay every dollar stolen with interest. Current calculation puts that at $3.2 million, including the Blackstone payments. That's everything I have, Frank said hoarsely. Then you'll be paying for a very long time, Howard replied without sympathy. Derek will also sign a statement admitting to the corporate espionage and agreeing to a permanent ban from working in the construction industry, I added. You'll surrender any business licenses and agree to cooperate if Blackstone faces legal action for their role in this. Derek slumped in his chair, defeated. What about Gerald? Diane demanded. He's not innocent in this. I finally looked directly at my father. No, he's not. Gerald met my eyes for the first time since entering the room. You knew, or you should have known, I said. You enabled the theft through neglect at best, complicity at worst. You systematically underpaid me while overpaying Derek. You created a toxic culture where favoritism mattered more than competence. Melanie, he started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Gerald Sullivan will step down from Sullivan Construction immediately. No retirement party, no golden parachute, no severance package, no consulting role. You're done. You can keep your personal home and your legitimate retirement savings, but your connection to this company ends today. It's my company, he said weakly. It's my company now, I corrected. 43% of it was yours. That portion will be bought out at fair market value, paid over time from company profits. You'll be a former shareholder? Nothing more. Diane started to protest, but I cut her off. As for you, Diane, those monthly deposits you've been receiving from one of Derek's shell companies, stop immediately. If you want to fight that in court, we can discuss your potential knowledge of the fraud and whether you should face charges as well. She closed her mouth. Her face flushed with rage but silent. These are the terms, I said. Accept them, and we handle this quietly. The company survives, employees keep their jobs, and you all avoid maximum criminal penalties. Reject them, and I'll let the federal prosecutors pursue every charge possible. You'll be fighting this in court for years, and the publicity will destroy whatever reputation you have left. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system. Derek's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. After a long moment, Derek nodded. My client accepts the terms, Thornton said. Frank didn't even consult his lawyer. I accept. Everyone looked at Gerald. He sat still for what felt like an eternity, staring at his hands on the table. Finally, he looked up at me. What are you going to do with the company? He asked quietly. I'm going to run it the right way, I said. The way it should have been run all along. Honestly, ethically, valuing people for what they contribute, not what their last name is. Your mother would be proud of you, he said, and his voice cracked. The words hit me harder than I expected. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them back. Yes, I said softly. She would. Gerald signed the papers without another word. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office, looking out at the city skyline as the sun rose over the buildings downtown. The office had been my father's for decades, but I'd completely redecorated it. Out went the dark mahogany and hunting trophies, replaced with lighter wood, comfortable seating, and photographs of actual construction projects our teams had completed. On the credenza behind my desk sat framed photos. My mother from when I was a child, her smile warm and genuine. A photo of Uncle Vincent I'd found in his Oregon home, showing a kind-faced man in his 40s. And a recent picture of Julia and me at the coast, both of us laughing at something that probably wasn't that funny, but felt hilarious in the moment. The transition had been brutal. The first month after the confrontation felt like trying to steer a ship through a hurricane. News of the ownership change had leaked, and with it came speculation, rumors, and nervous clients. I'd spent weeks taking personal meetings with every major client, showing them portfolios of projects I'd actually managed, demonstrating that Sullivan Construction's quality and reliability would only improve under new leadership. Some were skeptical. A few even pulled their contracts, spooked by the uncertainty. But most stayed once they understood I'd been the backbone of the operation all along. 3 new clients even signed on, impressed by my transparency and my commitment to ethical business practices. I'd renamed the company Sullivan and Vincent Construction, honoring both my grandfather Thomas Sullivan, who'd started it all, and my uncle Vincent, who'd given me the power to save it. The rebrand had been Julia's idea, actually. She'd taken a leave of absence from her Chicago firm and come on board as our new Director of Human Resources and Company Culture. Her first initiative had been implementing transparent salary bands and performance reviews, ensuring people were paid fairly for their actual contributions. Employee morale had skyrocketed. Turns out people work harder and better when they feel valued and fairly compensated. Who knew? Derek had pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He'd been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. He'd already been transferred to a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. I hadn't visited him, though he'd written me 3 letters. I hadn't opened them. Maybe someday I would. Maybe not. Frank Cordova had received 3 years and massive fines that would take him decades to pay off. His wife had divorced him, and last I heard, he was working as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit, his accounting license permanently revoked. Gerald lived alone in the house he'd shared with Diane. She'd divorced him within 2 months of the confrontation, claiming she'd been deceived and victimized. The judge hadn't been sympathetic to her claims of innocence, and she'd walked away with far less than she'd hoped for in the settlement. She'd left town entirely, I'd heard, moving somewhere down south to be near her sister. My father had tried calling me 17 times over the past 6 months. I'd answered exactly once 3 months ago. The conversation had been brief and awkward. He'd asked how the company was doing. I told him it was doing well. He'd said he was glad. Then silence stretched between us until I'd made an excuse and ended the call. I didn't hate him anymore. That was the strange thing. The burning rage that had consumed me after the retirement party had cooled into something more like sadness. Sadness for what could have been, for the father-daughter relationship we'd never have, for the years I'd wasted trying to earn love that was never going to come. 2 months ago, I'd flown to Portland to see Uncle Vincent's timber business. Sullivan Timber Industries was smaller than Sullivan and Vincent Construction, but beautifully run. The employees there spoke of Vincent with genuine affection and respect. They told stories about how he'd paid for a worker's daughter's cancer treatment when their insurance fell through, how he'd personally mentored young people, teaching them the timber trade, how he'd been fair, demanding, but never cruel, someone who expected excellence but appreciated effort. I'd walked the mill floor, run my hands over freshly cut timber, breathed in the sharp scent of wood and sap. I'd met with the management team, all of whom had been nervous about what the new owner might want to change. I'd told them the truth. I wanted to learn from them, to understand what made the business work, and to support them in continuing Vincent's legacy. The plan was to eventually merge the company's operations, creating an integrated construction firm that controlled everything from timber sourcing to final building. It would take years to implement properly, but the potential was enormous. Standing in my office that morning, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, but peace. A sense that I was finally on the right path. My phone buzzed. A text from Julia. Board meeting in 30. Don't forget the Henderson Project update. I smiled. Julia had adapted to corporate life with surprising ease, bringing her marketing background to bear on reimagining how we communicated with clients and employees. She'd also become invaluable as my sounding board, the person who'd tell me when I was being too cautious or too aggressive, who'd remind me to eat lunch and go home at reasonable hours. I gathered my materials for the board meeting, but paused when I saw the small wooden box on my desk. I'd been carrying it around for weeks, unable to decide what to do with it. During my trip to Oregon, while going through Vincent's personal effects at his home, I'd found a box hidden in his bedroom closet. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, spanning 15 years, letters he'd written on my birthdays, when I'd graduated from college, when I'd been promoted at the company, letters he'd never sent. I'd read them all in one sitting, tears streaming down my face in his empty house, 3,000 miles from home. The letters were full of pride and encouragement and love from a man I'd never known. Vincent had written about his own mistakes and regrets, about how he'd watched me from afar, through the investigators' reports, seeing my struggle and my strength, about how he'd wished he could reach out but feared disrupting my life or contradicting Gerald's lies about him. One letter, written 5 years ago when I'd been promoted to senior project manager, included a passage I'd practically memorized. "I see so much of your grandmother in you, Melanie. She was the strongest person I ever knew, with a backbone of pure steel, but a heart that could break for anyone suffering. Your mother must have been extraordinary to raise a daughter like you. I wish I'd been brave enough to meet you, to be part of your life, but I was always afraid Gerald would poison you against me the way he poisoned our father. Now I realize I should have had more faith in you. You're clearly your own person, not someone who can be easily manipulated or controlled. I'm proud to be your uncle, even if you'll never know it." The final letter, written 2 weeks before his death, was shorter. His handwriting had deteriorated, shaky from the medication and the disease ravaging his body. But the message was clear. "Melanie, if you're reading this, then Howard has done his job, and you know the truth about me, about your father, about everything. I hope my final gift gives you the freedom and power to build the life you deserve. I wish I'd been brave enough to be part of your journey sooner, but I'm grateful I could help you at the end. Be strong. Be honest. Be the person your mother raised you to be. Your uncle, who always believed in you, Vincent." I'd sobbed in that empty house, grieving for a relationship I'd never known I was missing, angry at my father for stealing it from both of us, grateful beyond words for Vincent's faith in me. Now, 6 months later, I kept one letter in the wooden box on my desk, the last one, a reminder of where I'd come from and where I was going. My office door opened, and Julia poked her head in. "Ready? They're waiting." "Yeah," I said, tucking the box back into my desk drawer. "Let's go build something good." 1 year after the retirement party that changed everything, I stood in the same Harborview Country Club ballroom, but this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The room was filled with the employees of Sullivan and Vincent Construction, their families, and genuine laughter. This was our first annual company celebration, and I'd deliberately chosen this venue, not to torment myself with memories, but to reclaim the space, to prove that places don't have power over us unless we give it to them. The event was nothing like my father's retirement party. Instead of forced formality and uncomfortable social hierarchies, people mingled freely. Rosa Martinez's teenage daughter was telling Tom Henderson's grandson about her plans to study engineering. Emma Wu and her fiancé were laughing with Julia about wedding planning disasters. The atmosphere was warm, inclusive, real. I stood at the podium, not to announce who was worthy and who wasn't, but to celebrate what we'd accomplished together. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, and the room quieted. A year ago, this company was at a crossroads. We could have collapsed under the weight of scandal and betrayal. Instead, we chose to rebuild, based on the values that should have guided us all along: integrity, fairness, and respect for every person who contributes to our success. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing our financial results. This year, Sullivan and Vincent Construction completed 19 major projects, brought in $62 million in revenue, and achieved a profit margin 12% higher than last year. Applause broke out. I smiled and raised my hand for quiet. But more importantly, we paid every employee fairly. We implemented profit sharing, so the people who do the work share in the rewards. We created transparent promotion pathways, where advancement is based on merit and contribution, not on whose last name you have or who you know. More applause, louder this time. We established the Vincent Sullivan Memorial Scholarship Fund, which this year will send 5 employees' children to college with full tuition assistance. We created a mental health and wellness program, because I've learned the hard way that taking care of our people means taking care of their whole lives, not just the hours they spend at work. I paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. These were good people. They deserved better than what my father had built. None of this would have been possible without every single person in this room. You showed up every day, even when things were uncertain. You gave me a chance to prove that Sullivan and Vincent Construction could be different, could be better. Thank you for your faith, your hard work, and your commitment. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Julia caught my eye from the side of the room and gave me a thumbs up. After the formal remarks, I mingled with employees, asking about their families, their projects, their concerns. This was the part of leadership my father had never understood, that people work better when they feel seen and valued as individuals, not just as cogs in a machine. Tom Henderson pulled me aside. My grandson just got accepted to state for construction management. He wants to intern here next summer. Says you're his inspiration. The comment made my throat tight. We'd be lucky to have him. Emma Wu showed me pictures from her wedding. You should have been there. But I know you were in Oregon dealing with the merger planning. I saw the photos Julia posted. You looked beautiful. As the evening wound down, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the back entrance, Gerald. My father had come after all. Security moved toward him, but I shook my head. I walked over slowly. He looked older than when I'd last seen him 6 months ago. More gray in his hair, deeper lines in his face. He was wearing a simple sport coat, not the expensive designer suits he'd favored before. I won't stay, he said before I could speak. I just wanted to see how you've transformed the company. How did you even know about tonight? I still have friends who work here. They told me. He looked past me at the ballroom, at the happy employees and their families. This is what it should have been all along. Yes, I said simply. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. I've been in therapy, Gerald said abruptly. Twice a week for the past 8 months, trying to understand how I became the kind of man who would destroy his relationship with his brother, his daughter, even his son. I didn't respond, just waited. After your mother died, I didn't know how to grieve, he continued, his voice rough. She was the heart of everything. I was just the guy who built things and made money. Without her to balance me, to remind me what mattered, I became hollow. Just ambition and ego and fear. Fear of what? Fear that if I wasn't successful, wasn't powerful, wasn't building an empire, then I was nothing. That I'd be forgotten. He finally looked at me directly. You reminded me so much of your mother. Same eyes, same determined set to your jaw when you're working on a problem. It hurt to look at you. Every time I saw you, I was reminded of everything I'd lost. So you pushed me away. I pushed you away, he agreed. I told myself I was being practical, that Derek needed the company because you'd be fine on your own. You were always so capable. But the truth is, I resented you for having your mother's strength and kindness when I had neither. The admission hung between us. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to demand why it had taken losing everything for him to figure this out, but I was tired of anger. I forgive you, I said quietly. He looked shocked. How can you? After everything I did? Because holding on to bitterness only hurts me. You've lost your company. Your son is in prison. Your wife left you, and you're facing the consequences of your choices. My anger won't change any of that. It'll just poison my life the way your anger and fear poison yours. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not, I agreed. But I'm not giving it because you deserve it. I'm giving it because I deserve peace. We stood there for another moment, and something shifted. Not reconciliation. Not quite. We'd never have the relationship we should have had. Too much damage. Too many years wasted. But maybe we could have something. Not close, but not enemies either. I should go, Gerald said. I just needed you to know that I finally see you. Not as a reflection of your mother, not as a disappointment, but as the remarkable woman you've become, despite everything I did to break you. Goodbye, Dad, I said. He nodded and walked away. I watched him leave, feeling something lift from my chest that I'd been carrying for longer than I could remember. The next morning, I sat in my office as the sun rose over the city. The photos on my desk caught the golden light. Mom, Vincent, Julia, my family. The ones who'd loved me, the ones who'd believed in me. I opened my laptop and pulled up the blueprints for our newest project, a community housing development for working families. 50 units of affordable quality housing built with sustainable materials from Sullivan Timber Industries, designed to be energy efficient and durable. It wouldn't be our most profitable project, but it would be the one I was most proud of. Julia knocked and entered with 2 cups of coffee. Morning meeting in 20. The Portland team is video conferencing in about the timber supply chain integration. Perfect. I accepted the coffee gratefully. You okay? She asked, studying my face. You seem different today. I saw my father last night. What? Here? I told her about the conversation, about his apology, about my decision to forgive him. Julia sat down across from me. Are you sure that's what you want? I'm sure. Not because he earned it, but because I'm done letting his failures define my life. I looked at the blueprints on my screen. I spent so many years trying to prove I was worthy of his approval, but I don't need it anymore. I know my worth because I created it myself, with a little help from an uncle you never met, Julia added softly. With a lot of help from Uncle Vincent, I agreed. He saw in me what I couldn't see in myself. He gave me not just financial power, but permission to believe I deserved it. I thought about that night a year ago, standing humiliated in front of 200 people while my father announced I was worthless. I thought about Howard Sterling standing up with those documents. I thought about the long journey since then, the hard choices, the rebuilding. You know what I learned? I said. Success isn't about revenge or proving people wrong. It's not about destroying your enemies or showing them they underestimated you. Then what is it? It's about refusing to become like them. My father tried to make me believe I was worthless, and I almost let him. I spent years chasing his approval, trying to prove I deserved love and recognition. But Uncle Vincent taught me something more important. The right people see your worth without you having to beg for it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city waking up below us. He showed me that integrity matters more than approval, that sometimes the family who believes in you isn't the one you were born into, but the one that chooses you. I didn't win because I destroyed my father or brother. I won because I refused to become like them. I built something better. Julia joined me at the window. You built something your mother would be proud of. Yeah, I said, my voice thick. I did. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, 2 friends who'd weathered storms together and come out stronger. You ready for that meeting? Julia asked. Always. As we walked toward the conference room, I thought about everything I'd learned. About betrayal and redemption. About the difference between family you're born with and family you choose. About the courage it takes to forgive without forgetting. About building something meaningful from the ashes of broken trust. My father had tried to teach me that power came from control, from keeping people beneath you, from hoarding success for yourself. Uncle Vincent had taught me the opposite, that real power comes from lifting people up, from building something that serves more than just your ego, from knowing your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. Every morning when I woke up now, I didn't carry the weight of trying to be enough for people who were never going to value me. I knew I was enough because I valued myself. That was the freedom nobody could take away. And that was the legacy I would build. Not an empire of fear and control, but a company where people were treated with dignity, where competence mattered more than connections, where success was measured not just in profit margins, but in the positive impact we had on people's lives. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my office one more time. I pulled out the wooden box and read Uncle Vincent's final letter again. Be strong. Be honest. Be the person your mother raised you to be. I'm trying, Uncle Vincent, I whispered to the empty room. Every single day, I'm trying. I put the letter away, turned off the lights, and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to prove that a business could be both profitable and principled. But tonight, I had peace. And that was everything. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to forgive someone who didn't deserve it, not for their sake, but for your own peace? Have you ever had to rebuild something that was broken and make it better than it was before? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories of finding your worth despite the people who tried to diminish you. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and building the life you deserve. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't defined by the people who failed to see it. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it reminds you that you're stronger than you think, worthy of more than you've been given, and capable of building something beautiful from even the deepest betrayals. Until next time, remember, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful and so at peace that you're no longer defined by the people who tried to break you.